as well. We've got David J with us, just talking about the benefits over at madfriars.com. The Padres are through the 2024 draft. We want to talk about the upcoming deadline, what the system looks like as well with David. So thank you as always, Jon and Jim, San Diego Sports 760. If you wouldn't mind providing for our listeners some perspective on a couple of these high picks of the Padres last week. Let's start with their first rounder, a left-handed starter out of high school, Cash Mayfield. What do we know, David? And thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, glad to talk with you guys, Jim. Thanks so much. And I definitely agree. I don't know how it's going to play out in terms of the quality of the players drafted, but they got a bunch of 80 grade names out of this year's class.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, they did.
Kel Fountain and Boston Bateman.
Brennan
exactly.
Butterworth.
So just sort of at a high level, to look at the class as a whole, they've really sort of put the bulk of the future of the class into the 4 high school kids that they took in the first 5 rounds. Those 2 lefties at the top of the class, are both really the sort of prototypical profile that you look for as high school kids who are coming out. The piece that's interesting on Mayfield is that last summer, rather than hopping on that showcase circuit that really has become the place that so many of the names in the public rankings are seen most heavily, he stayed home and really worked on physical development. He added 30, 35 pounds worth of muscle mass. And then he came out this spring. There's a big showcase called the Super 60 that's kind of the start of the of the scouting season in the early spring, and really impressed from there. The organization always talks about being as interested in the who the person is as the performer, and they've long had an appetite for guys who are committed to putting in work to pop up in a way in their senior year of high school. And so I think they're excited, not just about the fact that he's, already sitting 96, 97, but that he's a guy who saw what his goal was and really took his own path to get there in a way that he thought would be best to maximize his abilities.
No surprise here, David, as you probably already know, taking a high schooler with the first pick, taking high schoolers with the first 3 picks, this philosophy that this organization has with high school players. Do you think that's a good philosophy to have, or how do you view that from their standpoint?
Yeah, I think one of the things that that they like is that right now, especially with the number of organizations whose overall draft class is really driven by models, they feel like the industry is more heavily valuing college guys than high school guys. And you see that this year was the smallest number of high school selections in the first 20 rounds, which is now how long the draft is, that they've ever had in the draft. I think the organization sees it as an opportunity. They are a really heavily scouting driven organization. They have more area scouts. They put their area scouts on the ground in more places. They've got more cross checkers who are seeing more players every year than a lot of organizations. And I think, it feels pretty consistently like they are able to recognize some of those guys. And not all of the pop-ups have been great. I think Hudson Head, who was a big money 3rd rounder that they drafted a few years ago, who'd really popped up. They got him into the system. It wasn't working, and they were able to make him kind of the headliner of the Joe Musgrove trade pretty quickly. And I think they've done a nice job of balancing both seeing where the upside is with a Dylan Lesko, with a Robbie Snelling, with a CJ Abrams, who've been at the top of their classes in recent years. Obviously Jackson Merrill and James Wood at the top of that class, with recognizing when they might have gotten it wrong and trying to find a way to get out of that quickly.
That's really good insight, David J. Matt Friars with us right now, Jon and Jim. As we turn our attention towards the trade deadline, it's just that time of year. It's now late July. How does the system stack up in terms of its depth and strength compared to let's say even a year ago? Obviously, 2 years ago, there was a lot of talent in it. They traded a lot away in the Juan Soto trade. But is there room for A.J. Preller to work with, so to speak, if it doesn't involve the absolute top of his prospects, guys like Ethan Salas and Leo De Vries?
Yeah, and I do think that those guys are really untouchable.
Yeah.
And I think that the struggles that Snelling and Lesko have had this year means that the value you'd be getting in moving them is low enough that you're kind of pot committed with getting them both back on track. So really, I think what he's looking for this year is packages built around some of the second tier guys in the organization. I think about arms like Henry Baez, maybe Jagger Haynes, who are at single A right now. Maybe a guy like Isaiah Lowe, who's putting up really impressive performance at low A, who I suspect is on his way to Fort Wayne here pretty quickly. Those sorts of guys might be more on the pitching side. And I think there is some positional depth that has some interesting trade value. I think especially you look at switch hitting catcher Brandon Valenzuela, who, given the position in the organization, sort of is a natural trade candidate. I think those are guys that you can build packages around for second tier. If what you need is a depth starter, which I think this organization probably needs. If you need another, rental relief arm, I think that those guys give him the space to go out and fill those sorts of needs.
Leo De Vries of late has really shown like superstar qualities with what he is doing this year. For you, is this a guy that you may put ahead of Salas, or is Salas still like the number one guy in this organization ahead of De Vries?
I still have Salas ahead of him. I think, for as much as that month that he had last year was so remarkable, and it really was a 6-week stretch in Fort Wayne, or rather in Elsinore, where he was, simply the best player on the field in both production and the way he was going about his work. I think he's, the issues he's having this year, I don't think are major red flags. He's still taking really good at bats. He's being patient. He's not expanding the zone. He's an 18-year-old playing against guys who are large, pitchers who are largely 3 and 4 years older than him. And, I think some of the physical growth that still needs to come, that will come, is showing out. So I still have him ahead of De Vries. I think, and I think that at some point De Vries is going to have the same experience of running into guys who are just physically beyond where he is, but equally well positioned with his ability and his skill set that matches the tools. That those will be road bumps, not devastating things that can't be overcome.
So David J. Matt Fryer is with us right now, Jon and Jim. So to kind of put the numbers in perspective, whether it's a De Vries or a Salas, you really can't concern yourself, right, David, with the sheer numbers of these really young prospects. Of course, you'd love for them to have good numbers overall, but I mean, for Salas, it's about a lot. It's probably about dealing with some of these struggles. That might be as valuable as if he was actually not struggling right now in Advanced Day Fort Wayne. I mean, you can't look at the numbers, right?
Not exclusively, and you want to look at numbers like his chase rate, the swing and miss, his patience on pitches out of the zone, and then and you're also talking about a kid who really, for the first time in his life, is he's been asked to catch 3 games in a 4-day stretch a couple of times, and I think you can just look at his body today versus where it was 4 months ago. He's lost some weight. He's thinned out. I remember how many calories I could burn through as an 18-year-old just because of what just because my body was growing. I can't imagine the amount of caloric intake it would take to keep him growing right now. And I think, he'll have a chance to regroup this winter and reset a little bit here in 2025.
David, we appreciate it. We know it's a busy time. We've had the draft. We'll have the trade deadline coming up. We love your insight and perspective. And again, for our listeners, you need to check it out at madfriars.com. madfriars.com. David, thank you. Let's do it again soon, all right?
Absolutely. I'll be back out in the desert to watch some of these guys get underway. And then we've got coverage coming up again from out at the affiliates in August. So we'll have plenty of stuff for our subscribers, and then the daily content that's out there for everyone.
Terrific. We look forward to it again for our listeners at madfriars.com. That is David J.
Thanks,
We'll be
man.
back to that.